All right, I have 5:30. I will call this work session on Tuesday, February 22nd, Tuesday, to order. Clerk Sons Iden, could you please do a roll call for attendance?
Yes, Councilmember Henry.
I'm here.
Councilmember Mock.
Present.
Councilmember Sayer.
Present.
Councilmember McKnight.
Present.
Mayor Johnson.
Present. All right, everybody's here. Welcome everyone, and thank you for tuning into tonight's work session. The City Council is meeting remotely pursuant to Minnesota statutes, section 13D.021, due to the ongoing health pandemic. Work sessions are conducted to provide City Council with introductory information, opportunities to provide staff guidance, and to facilitate initial conversations on a topic. No votes are taken. As such, there's not an opportunity provided for members of the community to provide comments or to ask questions during a work session. Those interested in providing comments to the City Council can do it during the regular meeting, which will also be held via Zoom. Information related to joining the Zoom meeting is available on the agenda under a quick link, Watch City Meetings and View Agendas and Packets at the bottom of the homepage at cityofcarver.com. All right, with that, let's go into the 3rd Street Bridge project. Mr. Lanis.
Well, good evening. I'm gonna share my screen. Hope this works. There you go. And what are we? There it is. Does it show up for everybody?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. There we go. All right. Well,
Dan?
yes.
It's like really small. We can see most of your desktop right now.
It's the wrong screen then.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see.
Unless you're just bragging that you went on vacation.
No, this is what keeps me sane here. There was a time when it was peaceful and the ocean was blowing, ocean wind was blowing. It's what it's my sanity check. So let's see here. Doggone it.
We can see the deck. It looks like you just might need to maximize it.
Right, hold on a second. I'm just going to start over here again. So do screen 1. There we go. There we go. All right. Well, after 2 years, you'd think that this would be a smooth, easy process with no glitches. But sure enough, here I still bumbled my way into a Zoom presentation. So here it is. You should be seeing the 3rd Street Bridge full screen now. Correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, what we're going to cover today is project history, some needs, basis for replacement, some funding considerations, and then why the county is involved. We're trying to just paint a full picture about where we stand in time as regarding 3rd Street. Then we'll talk a little bit about where we stand at the moment, and some next steps. And so first issue is making sure that we're all talking about the same thing here. Of course, 3rd Street, you drive over it all the time, but what's underneath it, probably don't spend as much time thinking about or looking at. At the moment, the pavement's in good shape. Everything looks good on the street side of the equation. But if you look underneath, obviously the bridge is aged. It's certainly stood up extremely well for for a structure this age. But it's definitely showing its age, and everybody's aware that this has been a bridge that needs attention structurally at some point in time in the future. So the full bullet points that are key here is constructed in 1912. It's been around for a long time. It's been inspected by the county. It's on the county inspection program. They do inspections for cities underneath 5,000. Once you get above 5,000, there's some things to consider about with the city having to take care of its own structures and stay on top of bridge inspections. But that being is with MSA, you're able to have a funding source for some of that. But they were doing the inspections. If you're curious about why, It was recommended for replacement in 2020. They did a report that is consistent with prior reports, which is the structure is aged and there's some issues that require replacement. The nutshell of it is the recommend replacement of the culvert structure and adjacent walls before partial failures of either causes obstruction of the channel. So, it's a proactive approach. It's a matter of time, and it's very difficult in a bridge inspection to gauge that. What they're looking at is there's sufficient failure that some severe conditions could undermine the bridge. And so and typically what takes a structure down is water, some unusual loading. In this particular case, it's more likely not to be some water event that would undermine the foundation. But for the most part, it's held up to any number of floods, and it's probably not how many days, it's how many years would this hold up. But that's why they recommend replacement and give you some lead time to change it out in the coming years. So,
Dan, what does deficient status SD mean?
structurally deficient.
Okay, that's just what it stands for. Okay, thank you.
Yep, it's just a delineator because MnDOT tags bridges across the state as structurally deficient or not. And so SD is just a tag so that they know how many are deficient in the state. So it's a standard bridge report for that's geared towards MnDOT. So a little bit of background and history here. This isn't the first time this has been looked at. Brent has the true history on this. I'll try and paraphrase it somewhat. Back in 2017, there's the project for the street recon looked at 3rd Street Bridge. And the council had a series of conversations and reviewed several options based on the condition of 3rd Street during the planning phase of the project. And with the Main Street and 4th Street bridges recently constructed and in good form, the council had decided to leave 3rd in place and turn it into a one-way, lessen the significance of it is really how I'd gauge that. But again, I wasn't there for the conversation. So Brent, if you wanted to chime in on that and explain that more fully, I can pause for a second.
Sure. Yeah, it's not this is more of an editorial comment, but I would classify it as a little bridge fatigue. You know, the Main Street bridges and the 4th Street bridges were pretty heavy as far as construction and piling goes. So, and then, you know, if you look at just a normal downtown setting, you typically don't have 3 bridges in the span of 3 blocks to cross, in this case, a creek, much less maybe a significant river crossing. So the conversation centered around those things. You can see that kind of that top plan view was an idea kind of to what I just stated, to make it a pedestrian crossing and just leave the automobile or vehicle traffic off of that bridge.
Okay. The main takeaway is some key decisions were made back in the day about how to lessen the significance of it, but it didn't necessarily deal with the deficiency of the bridge itself. So really where it comes down to, you know, the 4th bullet point that I mentioned earlier, what was the limiting factor to some of the prior discussions about replacing the bridge? Well, it's expensive. And so replacing the bridges costs a lot and there wasn't money. Plain and simple. If this could have been done 10 years ago, I would imagine it would have been if the money was there. The bridge has not been in great condition for multiple years. So it's expensive. So what would a total project cost be? I think we're talking about the $1.5 million range, and this is what we would have submitted in the bridge bond application. And so this is a conservative estimate. We intended to be somewhat conservative because, again, it was a bond application. So we're expecting it to be substantially less than this, but we also wanted to have the bond application cover the ultimate potential of the roadway cost. and structure and all total project costs. So one thing to note here is there's a couple things that are not eligible under certain circumstances. When I talk about the small city status of your bond application, this is pretty notable for some of the next steps here. You are still being designated as a small city. These bottom two, the roadway and the engineering costs of doing this, those are not eligible as a MSA city, but as a small city, being designated by MnDOT for the bond application, they are. And that's why this is very significant and why timing is becoming more important to this. It's because when they look at a small city, they know you don't have the funding source. You don't have MSA funds to cover a lot of these things. Townships certainly don't have the funds to cover a lot of these things. So they make it very plausible for a small city or small agency that doesn't have a lot of cash flow to still replace their bridges. So they give them a different eligibility category. They cover almost everything. And so I'm going to get into that in a second here, but that's important to know here as far as the cost. So the city of Carver applied for the Minnesota Bridge Bond funds September 30th. I'd reached out to the Office of State Aid here, that specifically there's a department that handles bridge bond funds, and talked to them a little bit about timing on this, possibility of applying. And as Patty Loken had recommended, that, well, go apply in 21. You're still a small city. You can clearly state that you don't have funds for this. You would have to have a sponsor for a county. A county would have to sponsor this application, which I think we've talked about last time we went through this. But the county would sponsor it. You would be, as a small city, designated into a different eligibility category if they viewed as such. And so MnDOT awarded the city of Carver bond replacement funds as a small city as a result of that September 30th application. And it was kind of by a thread here, because obviously your MSA January of 22, and they took it and they gave you the benefit of the doubt that this was a 21 application. So the bridge bond process requirements ahead, because it was awarded as funds and for replacement funds. The city must complete plans and specifications for bridge replacement. These are just process steps of the bridge bond program. So you must have plans and specifications in their hands, approved by the bridge office. When the bridge office has approved those and they've signed it and said, yes, this is an acceptable replacement plan, and they would approve that, then it goes on a stack. And when bridge bond funds are available, they would say, City of Carver, you now have funds available, go build this. And then at the last step is the city replaces the bridge and MnDOT to pay for the replacement under the bond terms. So the one thing I'd like to impress upon you is they did have some leeway on this. I would say they're being they're being favorable to the city, honestly, is the best way I can put this on how they've processed this. You're now MSA, but they're still treating Carver as a small city for the purpose of this application. And so that would not necessarily be easy if we were to say do this in 25 and wait to 23. What they're asking for is, okay, we're treating this as a small city. We'll continue to treat it as a small city because it came in in September 21. We understand your MSA right now, but that's when the application was approved. Let's get this thing done as quickly as possible, ideally in 22. And the costs obviously end up being fairly different. And so if this is the outcome of their review, the city would have a maximum cost of $10,000 for engineering and inspection, and a maximum of $10,000 for construction. So the entire total project cost would be capped out at $20,000 for the city, the rest of it being bridge replacement bond funds. This number would be closer to $400,000 to $500,000 if it went under MSA, because they would say, all right, well, you have MSA now. You can use MSA for the roadway portion of this, and you can use MSA for the engineering and inspection side of this thing. And so it's certainly under favorable terms. That's why we did jump after this as quickly as we could to try and get this in, because this is a great deal for the city. And if this happens, you have a capped total expense. Now, I was very concerned about this because staff change, opinions change, different leaders within the organization can say, well, no, I don't think that is exactly how I'd interpret this. So I did reconfirm that, okay, we're going to have to advise, and you're going to make a decision based on what we're advising, that these are the things that we would assume. And is it fair to assume that the city is going to be treated as a small city going through this project and are going to have to cash flow only, but have a max expenditure as follows? Is it fair to assume that it's understood that we're no longer a small city, and but would be treated for all other conditions throughout this effort? Basically, I outlined, that I can't promise what they ultimately make control or what they make a decision on, and they control the outcome. And so they concurred that that's a fair assumption to be presenting. So that's all I can tell you right now. I want to be completely transparent. I do not control whether or not MnDOT would change their mind. Your worst case scenario is they change their mind and it's some variation of 20,000 up to that 400. The answer that they gave me is they would treat it as a small city because of the conditions, but an advised delivery as quickly as possible in 22. So some limitations to the program: does not pay for anything fancy, anything outside of normal bridge styles. Does not pay for flood mitigation elements. This is something that's significant in this location only because of the attachment to the levee. So for the levee, for example, we'd have to raise the railing up. There would be some distance in which the state office would say, no, we pay for a 3-foot railing height. You're on the hook for the other 2 feet of railing or 3 feet of railing, whatever's necessary for the levee elevation. The rest of it, I don't think we would really take on right now, other than just preparing for a future levee wall that ties into the bridge. And that would be something that would just simply be a matter of design to prepare for walls coming out once the levee project would need that, and that would get built with the levee effort. The bridge just needs to accommodate that potential connection. We would probably raise the railings though, because you wouldn't want to do that after the fact, but it would be very small. To build the
I
railing.
have a question.
Yep.
Is that example of raising the railing, is that an example of like a increased cost and you have an idea of how much it would be, or is that just more of an example of like, we need to meet their minimum requirements and anything additional we want to do, we take on the work?
Yeah, it's an example of if you do a lot of things that don't align with the simple replacement of the bridge, the city would pay for those directly. So that's one example. But if you put stone on
Is it a very costly one, that the example you gave?
the wall, no,
Yeah.
it's if we're gonna do a 3.5-foot wall and have to raise it up to a 5.5-foot, that's 2 extra feet of concrete over the length of the bridge.
What are some things that would be costly? Like I would think, really, elaborate,
stone?
designs, or, is there
Stone.
Stone, okay.
Stone on the bridge would be very expensive. They could look at this and say, you can do this with a box culvert and
Okay.
some elaborate, or maybe do a flood wall or something like that. There's different design types that'll have to be factored into this replacement. And we have to see what the bridge office has to say as far as what's considered replacement. What we would be doing is taking the direction of the council and saying, we want to replace the bridge, we want to fix it in accordance with what they consider to be eligible. And I would come back and tell you, if you want this to look a certain way, or if you want certain aesthetics, then here's the cost that you would be cash flowing and paying for directly. So if you just do the replacement, you're 10 or $20,000. If you do anything over and above that, it's 20 plus, whatever that number is. So the other thing is the city must cash flow this. So that would be something that would come from Brent as far as how we would do that. But you would have to cash flow the initial design. That would be a next step here. And then you'd have to cash flow a delivery of the project. You'd have to, and then there'd be a quick reimbursement process that's usually a month to month cash flow discussion. But until this thing is officially released for bridge bonds, you're going to be cash flowing at least the plans. So what would have to happen next is you'd have an authorization to prepare plans and specifications for 3rd Street. That's, an upcoming step of the council. Should you decide to do that, and then there'd have to be an interfund loan to temp finance bridge plans. Estimate somewhere in the 85. We think it's in the 75 range typically to do a bridge to this nature, with some coordination on the levee that's going to be necessary to figure out the flood walls and things like that. So we'd estimate a budget of about 85 to produce plans sufficient that the bridge office will sign the replacement plans. Completion of plans is the next step after that, and that's just getting it done and submitting it to MnDOT for approvals. That would be summertime. And then, of course, we would be sitting and waiting until they authorize to proceed with bridge replacement, which could happen as soon as this fall. And then at that point, you'd be constructing at probably 23, possibly as early as fall, though. I mean, it could happen quicker. So that is the full process on 3rd Street, and I'll just stop and open it up to questions here. So.
All right, Council. Questions, Christy? I see you first.
Okay. The question I had, can you go back a slide?
Yes.
So if we're looking, so you said 20,000 would be our investment. We have to cash flow the 85 to start with, but we get reimbursed that, or am I missing something?
No, that's how it works. It's reimbursable, yes.
Okay.
So they need a set of plans in order to act on.
And then if we get them the plans, when do they reimburse us? How long is that? Is it in the same fiscal year? Is it the next fiscal year?
I would estimate that it would be the same fiscal year. I'd estimate they're probably talking the fall. It's when I believe the plans are accepted and approved by the bridge office, and it goes into the office as a completed plan set, which would time out to be around summer or fall. I can follow up on that topic though, because I'm not sure I'm 100% on the exact timing trigger, but yet I believe it falls right in that time frame is when they have plans. So fall.
Okay. Brent, can you remind me on the Main Street Bridge, did we do a process like this?
No, on the Main Street Bridge, that's a county bridge. So
That's right.
The county was the lead on that. On the 4th Street Bridge, there was, I would say, close to a similar piece where just from memory, most of the bridge followed the same funding cycle. The difference with the 4th Street project was we did that as a part of the entire reconstruction of 4th Street. So, but we have the available resources to cash flow as long as we have a steady rate of reimbursement to fund a project like this from a cash flow standpoint. And the state has had a pretty good reputation, at least with us on past projects, Commerce Drive being an example, whereas, when we get the proper documentation, and it doesn't take them long, typically 30 to 60 days to reimburse the city for a requested reimbursement.
And then we're looking at some of the add-ons. I'm trying to picture the bridges we have, because we'd obviously want to somewhat similarly match what is, I guess, above the roadway. So Dan, there's a railing that we have. Would that be considered an extra?
And can I jump in on this one? So
yeah.
I think what you'll notice with this bridge being different than the Main and the 4th is both Main and 4th have essentially walls, so that those are poured concrete, and then there's form liners that make it look like stone. And so what Dan is describing and what our request has been to date to MnDOT is just to do basically a culvert section. So there wouldn't be a head wall is what I think the technical term is on that. But that's where the lion's share of the costs were related to past bridges. Is the head wall, when you think about it, for the footings and the concrete, that's where the costs really escalate. Am I hitting that correctly, Dan?
Yes.
Okay, so for this bridge, we would be looking at basically putting the same culvert type back in, or would it look somewhat different? I mean, obviously it's gonna look somewhat different, but is it gonna be remarkably different from what we're seeing here? Or fairly typical of this?
You know, I'll put it into it's probably going to be quite a bit different in that, you know, we might end up with different, instead of a railing like that, it might end up being partially concrete railing. I would say very different. And the reason being is because we have the levee built into this. So what we'd be talking about a potential vertical watertight face that could be as high as 5 feet at where that black railing stands, and that's less bridge and more levee, and so that would be a very substantial visual difference. And then below the street, you know, if, for example, the face of it, we could put in some similar features on this, but no matter what we do, it's going to be, it could be a half arch or it could be a square. And those are things that would be sorted out. And I think we have a little bit of flexibility as to how we do that, but I would go so far as to say it's probably going to be a pretty different look.
And for a visual cue, would the pedestrian underpasses on JCP be a good example? It's just instead of people, there's water going through it.
Yeah, maybe, except those. Yeah, I mean that's what a box culvert looks like. I'm not sure we'd go with the box culvert because we already have an arch bridge here, so we might be able to justify staying with an arch. Again, we're going to have to, because the bridge office is going to be particular, we'll have to throw a few options out there and see what they would consider justifiable, because obviously we don't want to get outside the eligibility bucket without letting you know. So could be both.
Okay. You know, if we ended up having 5-foot walls there, that would be a big change when it comes to sightlines. But when it comes to the rest of the system, when you're looking at the levee and everything else, it doesn't bother me if we have to go that high. I'd prefer it if we didn't have to, that we don't exceed the height that we have to for any reason. It'd be nice to be able to see over it. I know in some of the other bridge discussions from years gone by, when we were doing some of the other ones, we had talked about having things more decorative and looking at things differently. To me, this is, as long as it is functioning and it's utility and it works, that's all that matters to me. For the price that we're getting it at, this seems like the absolute no-brainer to do this. But I don't want to look at spending additional money, especially since we have so much outputting right now with our payment management plan and everything else that's been worked into our budget with our tax rate, that we go above and beyond. To me, as long as it's functioning and we're up to standard with it, I'm great with it. And I guess the aesthetics of it isn't quite, the aesthetics from the railing down are, I don't care as long as it functions. Above, we'll have to take a look at what that might be, just so we don't have something that looks, something that looks a little better. But I am all for doing this for the price that we are getting. That's all I have.
Thanks, Christy. Glenn?
I concur with Christy. As far as the price is concerned, you can't beat it. Aesthetically, I mean, it's simple putting in a box culvert. I think that might fit better into our long-range levee plans, just because I think it'd be easier to work with. But as far as aesthetics I'm not really into the aesthetic look of it. I'm more into the cost factor and the utility of the bridge. And for 20 grand, it's a no-brainer. That's all I got.
Thanks. Joy?
I concur. The price is great. And I think, this whole area along the creek is going to change dramatically with the levee anyway. So at this point in time, just getting this done at the price without a lot of extra investment sounds like a good route to me.
Thank you. Joy, or I'm sorry, Lori?
Yeah, probably similar tone. I definitely would want above aesthetics. I want the highest priority to be the function that it aligns with any levee work that's going to be done. Not just the cost, but knowing that this is the second time, in a not real long history that the bridge is being worked on, and then we foresee in our future, levee work. I just have a hard time with the idea of working on it 3 times, but and that's why I would put whatever needs to be done, that the function aligns with any future levee work, just so that then we're only doing it 2 times, hopefully not 3 times.
Thanks, Lori. I think for me, I don't think that we had line of sight to this bridge program, or that the bridge had deteriorated to this point when we discussed this issue in 2017. So it's not like, and Glenn, Christy, Brent, tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we said like, oh, $20,000 bridge. No, thanks, we're good. We've already done 2 other bridges. It was a different scenario and a different time. I agree. I'm hearing a lot of the term no-brainer. I think it's a no-brainer. I think we'd be silly to pass this up because this is a deal. Dan, I understand the caution in your tone and your presentation. Please, and I know you're doing it, but like, write down the name of every person you've talked to at MnDOT, save every email. I just want to make sure that nothing happens where folks go back on their word for us being able to get into this program the way that we did with our application while we were still a small city, even though we're kind of on that bubble. To Lori's point, I think, I want this to fit into the greater levee project, like a puzzle piece that matches. I think that might potentially, and I think we're going to come to a point where we're going to have to decide if we want to spend more money now or more money on the levee project to make this kind of fit in and to be part of that project. But I agree with what Lori said. I don't want this to be an every 5-year thing where you can set your watch of, oh, it's been 5 years, they got to be tearing up the 3rd Street Bridge again. I get the urgency, so I'm ready to go and get going on this as soon as possible, again, because I don't want to miss out on that really, really good deal for $20,000. Let's see, I'm just looking at my notes here. The $20,000, Brent, I don't remember this as something that was in the budget for 2022, is it? Or how are we going to pay for it?
It would be a TBD. I mean, you could likely the special capital fund.
Okay.
I say there's a, not that you were keeping like a daily like check rec on it, but like I think there's a natural connection that you could be inclined to make if you looked at the conduit bond financing as a $20,000 in and a way to fund the bridge project. There's we're not down to our last 20,000, so I don't want to represent that like, oh, if we didn't have that, we couldn't do it. But there are resources to make that happen.
Okay, great, thank you. And then my last question is, I think when we've talked about this before, because the bridge is so old, it falls into that historic category. Is that a hurdle that's going to impact this project, Dan?
It would have, if it was historic, it would certainly. It is not on the historic registry. I know it's been referred to as historic, but there's a very specific list that it has to be on. If there's federal dollars, it has to be eligible for the registry. There's not federal dollars. If it's state dollars, it has to be on the registry itself. And it's been reviewed and it is not on the registry. But otherwise, it's a good question. Yes, it's tremendously significant if it is.
Okay. But nothing that we need to worry about.
Nope, first thing we looked at. Otherwise, we'd be talking a whole different level of outcome here if it was a historic bridge.
Okay. that is all I had. I think we're all in favor of moving forward with this. Do you need anything from us, Dan?
Nope, next steps were outlined here, and you'll see this again in March, and so it'll be the formal council action to approve this to proceed, and I will continue working with MnDOT on your activities here to move this ahead. And yeah, I've thanked them for the designation, and again, I think at this point here, they're looking forward to seeing this done and helping be a partner on this, so it should work out well.
Great. As are
Dan,
we, Stan. Oh, go ahead, Christy.
I have one more question. So when do we think this is going to actually go into MnDOT? It'll be presented to them, the plan.
The plan would be submitted in the summer. I haven't picked a formal submittal date, but it would be probably midsummer, probably July, August.
Okay. And this is maybe just me. I feel an urgency to have that in as soon as we can, because I don't want to let this leg out there. We want to stay as in good graces with this as we can, because this is something that we are never going to see again for this price amount, right?
No, this is a one-timer.
Okay.
So we're just on the verge. So this should go forward. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Dan. I appreciate your work on this. I know that this was a lot of your work getting it in before that year-end deadline. Brent?
Just before we check out on this conversation, just wanted to ask the council if you had any expectations other than kind of our normal communication pieces for this project. So we're starting to talk about it. My inclination would be to kind of hold on, kind of like we're reconstructing the bridge until we have more of a plan in place. But if you had other thoughts on that, I'd be happy to kind of chat about that, so we're on the same page for sharing this project with the rest of the community.
There's a chance that we might not get funds this year, right?
As far as the replacement program,
Correct.
there's a chance.
Okay.
They're more
I think
likely
we should,
to be fall, but
yeah, my gut says we should wait until that's more locked down, because what do we want to share? Like who, what, when, where, why, and how? And if we don't know the when, that's a pretty big piece that's missing.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying it, because in our other forms like of communication, it'll sprout up, but it's kind of hard to talk about a project when you don't exactly know when it's going to happen. But I think it's fair to say that we're planning on it to happen in the next 1 to 2 years. We just don't know when. But if you wanted maybe a more aggressive communications campaign with that, I want to get that feedback now so we can plan for that and meet that expectation.
I would rather wait until we knew we had the engineering specs finished and ready or turned in or ready to turn in. At least we're a little farther down there, because right now it's pretty pie in the sky yet as to what we even have going. So I think I'd rather wait until at least that point.
Thank you.
Any other yeah, when we have renderings and pictures that we can share what it'll look like, I think that'll be helpful in telling the story of this. Does anybody else feel differently?
Concur.
okay.
All right. Do you have what you need from us, Brent?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. All right, moving on to item number 3, the Green Step Cities update. Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm going to share my screen. How's that look?
It's not.
I need to flip them.
Screen. We can see like notes.
I think we're seeing your main screen. It's the same exact thing that happened to me. Screen number 1 and 2 are reversed. So when I click on the screen that's supposed to be 2, it actually shows up as my main screen. So it keeps happening because it's very confusing. So yes, same thing.
What if we do that one?
Perfect.
Yep.
Did we just hear our engineer tell us that it was confusing?
Yeah. Just wants
And
to
I
make
feel like he
himself
was-
feel better.
Yeah, he was trying to like justify mine too.
I was. Hey, it should be screen 2. It's not.
Alrighty, let's rock and roll. So tonight I have, I think, a pretty fun and exciting update about Green Step Cities. So a little bit of an overview of the program. It's a voluntary program across the state of Minnesota. Through that program, there are 29 what they call best practices, or essentially categories for things that cities should focus on, with 170 actions. So within those 29 categories, you can take a look at the 170 actions, take a look at things that you're already doing, things that you want to plan to do in the future to receive credit. I think our last update, this number was in the 130s. So since our last update in January 2020, 144 cities and tribal nations across the state of Minnesota are part of the program. And again, Carver joined the program January 20th as a one-step city. So to join the program, it just required a resolution to join, which we did in
Erin,
January
I'm sorry to
2020.
interrupt, but we're still just seeing your
Oh,
first slide.
How's that?
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay, my screens are doing strange things. I blame Dan. So there's everything I just said, but not necessary. So again, the best practices, 29, and then the actions, 170. So there are ratings that go up to 5, so you can be a 5-step city right now. Well, last week we were a 1-step city because we had passed that resolution. We are, based on their information, a B city, which essentially means that we have a population and a staffing category that hits us at B. So there's A, B, and C depending on population and staffing. So there are different requirements. So we're not being held to the same standard in this program as a Minneapolis or a St. Paul, just based on population and staffing. So we have comparable partners that we can look to, as well as experts through the program that we can say, hey, I want to explore best practice number 4. What can you tell me about XYZ? So it's a great program for information sharing, and then I think a good push to continue moving cities forward. So the big news tonight is that we accomplished step 2. When we worked through the program, we had a feeling that we likely were already doing most of the work to get to step 2. It was just likely going to be reporting that we needed to do. So I was able to cruise through the 29 best practices and those actions to be able to submit to the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and they have verified us as a step 2 city. So what that means is that we have completed 6 of the best practices. So what that means, it's work that we were already doing. So nothing changed in our day-to-day life. I just had to spend some time on the Green Step City website working with their staff to make sure that we were checking their boxes. So where we hit on the best practices were incentives for water, energy and sustainability improvements, economic and regulatory incentives, have a comprehensive plan, which is required by the Met Council, so that was an easy one. Design for natural resource conservation, efficient city fleets, and create and manage a park and city land management. So going into some specifics of what that means in Carver, since those are just the outline of the best practices. So for the incentives for energy, water, and sustainability, the fact that we had the Ratio program qualified there, so we checked that box. Economic and regulatory incentives for redevelopment or repurposing. Since we have a historic downtown, that we have a Heritage Preservation Commission that has residential and commercial guidelines, we're able to check a box. As you know, throughout several new developments in Carver, we have conservation easements. So areas of developments that we are preserving for bluff, wetland conditions. So we signed those pretty heavily, which was able to get us through that best practice. The purchase of the building inspections, new vehicle, the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle was the city fleets, and then the adoption of the parks master plan, along with some irrigation work that we do in Ironwood Park, was able to get us the create and manage park and city management standards and practices. So again, work that we were doing just through our daily work, which made it really easy and exciting. So at the June LMC conference, we'll be invited to participate in their award ceremony. We'll get our second block. We have our first block at City Hall, so we'll get the second step. So some discussion for tonight. Where do we go from here? What's next? Do we pursue step 3? So step 2 required 6 of the best practices to be implemented. Step 3 is 12. So a significant amount of work to go from 6 to 12. And there are some examples of what we could do to get to step 3. So a big one is entering all information. So information about city energy use into a B3 benchmark database. So You take all energy information from city-owned facilities, plug it into their website so you can start to see trends, identify places that you could save energy. We could implement an energy rating disclosure policy for residential buildings, require new sitting buildings to be built using SB 2023 energy standards, adopt complete streets, reduce or eliminate parking minimum. So like I mentioned before, there's 29 best practices with 170 actions. So we checked the box for 6 of them. There would be an additional 6 to be step 3. So a quick overview of where we're at, looking for some discussion about both, I would say, a nice pat on the back for all of us, because a lot of the work that we recognize for step 2 is the work that the council has recently reviewed, like the Ratio program, the Parks Master Plan. So I think a good step to show that we are navigating some of these new topics pretty wisely, using experts that we have both on city staff and then across the state for some of this information. And then interested to hear the pulse if we want to continue pushing for step 3, which likely would require some pretty significant staff work, but something that we could probably dive into a little bit to see where we're already meeting some of those best practices, or where we're close enough that it wouldn't feel hopefully like too much of a departure from our day-to-day work. So I will be the one to say congratulations on step 2, and I'm sure that same sentiment will be shared in June at the LMC conference.
All right. Joy, I know you've got something to say, and it looks like you're off mute. Thoughts?
I am. Thank you, Erin, for all your work on this. I think this is a great achievement to get to step 2. We kind of thought we would get there, and it's really nice to see that we are going to get there. So I'm sad to miss the conference in June. Anyway, you know, my thoughts are we have a lot going on in the city over the next few years, considering our parks, considering expansion of the fire department building, public works building. We probably have some other things that are on the radar over the next few years. It would be nice to identify, along with some of those projects, if there's something that we can do along with them that would move us in other steps. I mean, I don't want to go out of our way to say, oh, here's this best practice and let's go do it. And it's not something we have planned for. It's not aligned with what we're already doing. I like your suggestion of trying to incorporate it into things that we're already doing and investing in that way. I know some cities set goals for they want to achieve like a step 3 by XX year. I don't know that if we want to do that or not without some further information, but if we can align it to some of the activities that we have planned out over the next several years, I think that would be a good start.
Thanks, Joy. Christy, you want to go next?
Sure. You were great on giving the council so many props for this, but I think we have to look at staff. Staff has spent a good deal of time working with this and putting this in action. So thank you for all your hard work, all the staff who's worked on it. I agree with Joy saying that if it's something that we're already working on, let's see if there's something that goes along with it. I'm not currently looking at spending a great deal of money to put us into that next step. But if it's something that easily aligns, something that maybe doesn't cost something, it's just how we do it, and then I'm all for it. But I would need more information, obviously, on what these next steps look like. We don't have all of that right here tonight. And again, if small increments are fine with me, I'm not ready to say, by year 2024, we're going to hit this, because we've got so much on our plate right now. It still is a small city just trying to get ourselves set here. So I think we did a great job. We're at step 2 already. I'll be happy to see if things come down the pike. But again, I guess those are kind of my feelings on not being overly aggressive right now moving forward, especially when it comes to finances. But if it falls in line with something we're doing and there's something small we can shift towards it, great.
Thanks, Christy. Laura, looks like you're off mute.
Yes, thanks. So Ms. Smith, Mrs. Smith, thank you for the presentation and the work that you and your team have done. I really look to you guys to recommend some best practices that would align with some initiatives of the things that we're already doing, like some of the projects mentioned earlier. I did have one item that I've seen out in communities. So I'll mention it, and then I don't know if that is a best practice or if that would align with something. So what it is, and I learned that it's called bike tune-up stations. Some cities have them. Definitely the DNR has several on different trails, but it's little like gadgets to tune up your bike. So just knowing that in our future we have a bike, designated bike path, I thought maybe that, would be a nice amenity, but yeah, I don't know the cost. I don't know if that would be something that would be considered a best practice for Green Step cities. So I just thought this would be a time to mention that.
Hey, Lori, I'm pretty sure we have one of those in Depot Park.
Oh, I did not know that. So is that kind of the same area, or like that's just not on that list of best practices?
So I would say that might be one of like the 170 actions, but there's usually a couple actions that you need to have to complete the best practice, like that 29. So definitely something I can take a look to see if it's listed. I don't think it would be one that would click us to like a 7th best practice completed, but it might be one of those action steps.
Okay. But yeah, maybe see if it makes sense, if there's an interest to grow the number of tune-up stations.
Sure.
I guess I'll have to check that out, the one that's down there.
Pretty nifty. Glenn? Oh, Glenn, I'm sure you said something amazing, but you were on mute.
Well, I think everybody knows my view of the Green Step program. It's already cost us extra money, and I look at the the practices, and anytime we're going to start adding costs to buildings and residential buildings and policies, I'm not against it because the cost of construction is high enough already. I don't know. I'm not a Green Step guy, didn't vote for it, and I just soon it disappear. But hey, I'm only one voice. But that's my opinion. That's all I got on it.
All right. Thanks, Glenn. I kind of agree with the majority. I think this is great. I like the progress. I'm proud of our progress, but like Christy said, I don't feel like I have any ownership of the progress. It's all staff who's kind of connected the dots and done the work as far as getting us up to that next level. So I think that's great. And Erin, thanks for your work on this. I agree with kind of the consensus of the stuff that we're doing. I don't necessarily think with everything that we've got going on in the city that we need to set out a list of goals or be, particularly in tuned in this with all the other priorities that we have. But I think, Erin, I'd like to see, if we can do an annual review like this and just kind of check in. I think that would be good to kind of just see where we're at. And I think both Erin and Joy, you guys both know so much about this program. I think I would ask that if you can kind of always keep that in the back of your brains. So the next building that we build, if you could ask us, like, do you want to do these energy standards, yay or nay, and just make sure that it's kind of at the forefront when applicable, especially for that stuff that you can't go back and redo. We can't necessarily, well, I'm sure we could, but it wouldn't be super cost effective to, bring this building up to those standards. So if we can just keep that kind of on the back burner, but keep talking about it on an annual basis, I'd like to proceed in that manner.
We can do that.
All right. Do you have what you need from us?
We do. Thank you.
Thanks, Erin. All right. Up next, the city manager's report. Brent?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. A couple updates for you. As some of you know, Erin's going to be taking a little bit of a leave this spring. And so we're going to be bringing on some support staff from Bolton and Mink. Carrie Davis is a planner's name with Bolton and Mink that you'll start to see at some city council and planning commission meetings. So Erin and Dan are working on a plan to bring him to a couple of meetings and introduce him before Erin leaves. But even though there's no duplicating Erin's, I'm trying to say this without making like an inside joke. There's no way to duplicate Erin's skills and abilities. I think Carrie will do a nice job for us while she's away. We're down to 2 finance director candidates as finalists. Aaron and Vicky helped me interview over the first round, and Dan Lanas and Dave Anderson, our city attorney, will be helping me interview the finalist candidates on this Thursday, February 24th. So looking forward to that. I'd like to make an offer to the preferred candidate, hopefully by the end of the week, frankly. So stay tuned for more information on that. Vicki and Brenda Good are continuing to work on integrating kind of Zoom Granicus and kind of the real world kind of camera views of the council chambers. As you know, we're heading back into the council chambers for your first meeting in March, which is March 7th. We've identified some bugs in the system. Vicki is going to be reaching out to our supplier, and we have some other resources that we think can help us out. It's kind of the new way of the world for having more of an interactive city council meeting experience with Granicus and Zoom. So moving toward that. Some unfortunate news, which happens from time to time with our part-time administrative assistant positions. Teddy Fahey's accepted a full-time position with another organization. So although we're sad to see Teddy go, happy for her to find a full-time opportunity in another organization. She's been great on a bunch of different levels, and we'll miss her quite a bit. So, and then a couple other pieces, as you've probably noticed, the new decorative lights on Jonathan Carver Parkway are up. They've kind of more or less unveiled the first 2 monuments at Jonathan Carver and 6th Street. They're not lit yet, but you can get an idea of what they will look like, because there's 2 other monuments on the northwest corner that need to be done as well. So it's really starting to take shape. So looking forward, as I think everyone is, to the spring and warmer temperatures, so we can see that corridor in full bloom, if you will. And then the last thing I had, and this is kind of a setup for Dan Lanas to talk about our 6th Street project. As you know, 6th Street is a state aid street, so although we're reconstructing it without state aid dollars, they'll still have an opportunity to review it. And so there's a application piece to that related to parking, and a resolution that we're going to be asking the council to adopt at your next meeting. So I wanted Dan to kind of give a little commercial to that, for that request to the council tonight, and make sure that we've got that covered for your March 7th meeting. So with that, Dan, can you take it away?
Yeah, absolutely. I can take it a step further and share screen 1 and not screen 2.
Well done.
And so you'll see a stated resolution. This is the intent of this is to explain that this is a very standard document. It's a requirement for any state aid route for every project. There's nothing that's really custom about this that I really can share. Here's where it applies, here's where it doesn't. The rules are very simple. The road is wide enough to support 8-foot parking lanes, or it is not. So when you submit any plan through the state aid system, they're going to have a checklist and say, okay, our width is sufficient for parking on both sides. And if it is not, there has to be a state aid resolution that goes in so that they can document the city is going to, because state aid money is involved, is going to not allow parking on this road because it's not in compliance with the state aid standards and statutes. And so what would have to happen, because there's LRAP money involved and we have a 32-foot roadway, because we don't have sufficient width for parking, we have to provide this with the plan. So the intent would be to bring this no parking resolution forward at the March meeting. It's simply a matter of process as far as we're concerned. It has to be attached to the plan in order for them to sign it. And it simply states that you will comply with state aid standards and not allow parking on this street because the width is not sufficient. And if you wanted to modify that at some point in the time, you can, but it's going to require widening the street. And so that that is what the basis of this is. So we would be looking at possibly bringing this forward at the March 7th, almost on a consent agenda type of a discussion, because again, for us, it's just a formal document that needs to be executed. But I'd be open to any comments or feedback on this. I think we've talked a lot about the layout. I look at this more as a formal process associated with this route being state aid right now.
And Dan, we already approved plans and specs, right? You're working-
Authorization of plans and specs. And so what this is, sorry, what this is it goes in with the final plan. And this is when MnDOT signs off on it. They have to have this document in their stack in order to sign the plan, which is currently at state aid right now.
Okay, Lori, you have a question?
Yeah, I do. And if this could maybe be answered when it's presented next time, is does this mean that they would tell us what to put for no parking signs? So then do we give up that control, and then maybe just to know what they would require, so we're not surprised, or maybe that decision's going to be made for us? Do they dictate no parking signs?
There's just some frequency guidance. It's a standard MWTCD sign that states no parking. It's a standard sign frequency that's suitable to post the intent. Past that, I've never heard of any state agency getting into anything other than they're going to review the plans and they're going to expect to see no parking.
Right, thank you.
Anybody else with questions for Dan? Seeing shaking heads. Christy, I don't see any. No, I see a shaking head from all three remaining council members. Okay, I think we're good, Dan.
Okay, so just the next step on this is you would probably see this on consent. There wouldn't be a specific discussion on this other than just informing you about why it's on consent. It's going to be tailored towards the needs of MnDOT, and if you have any expectations other than that, just feel free to let me know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else, Brent? All right. Moving on to council requests. Anybody have any requests? I see Christy shaking her head. I see Joe shaking her head. I see Glenn shaking his head. I see Lori shaking her head. Okay, with no council requests, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
We have a motion by Councilmember Mock and a second by Councilmember Sayer. Clerk Sons-Iden, can you please call the roll for the motion, please?
Yes, Councilmember Henry.
Aye, Glenn Henry.
Councilmember Mock.
Aye, Christy Mock.
Councilmember Sayer.
Aye, Lori Sayer.
Councilmember McKnight.
I Joy McKnight.
Mayor Johnson.
Courtney Johnson. All right, motion passes unanimously. We'll see you all at 7.